Hi, it's Leader Post Sports Editor Rob Vanstone. I'm here, as is the case every week, with Murray McCormick, our fine, hobbled football writer. And what else? Roughriders, Roughriders, Roughriders. It's only getting more interesting as the season draws to the regular season draws to a close. They're 11-5 after beating BC here on Saturday. What are your thoughts about where the team is going into the final 2 weeks of the regular season?
Boy, imagine if they lost that game, what we'd be talking about today.
My goodness.
It'd be a whole other sort of discussion. We'd be talking about the offense didn't really perform, and the Riders are heading on the road to play two very good teams. Instead, they win, and they win handedly, and they win 8 turnovers, and they score points after every turnover, and it was just kind of a bit of a return to that sort of uplifting feeling we had in the summer times when we had tans and we looked like we were healthy. Now we kind of got the fall tan going here. So I guess we're going to kind of sum it up as a big win, huge win, money win. It's every win. It's everything they needed to do in a game that was important to make next Saturday's game huge against Calgary.
Yeah. Otherwise, these last 2 weeks of the regular season are strictly for show. Who knows who they'd be resting for at least the regular season finale. Anyway, it wouldn't really be that interesting, would it? I mean, yeah, they'd still have that chance of, okay, if this happens and that happens and this happens, but I think from a realistic perspective, would they have really been playing for a lot?
Oh, I think people would still need to buy paper because we would have made great, interesting stories this last 2 week run, no matter what, Rob? But
that's great self-promotion there, Mark.
That's true. But it would have been pretty quiet 2 weeks. I think we would have been speculating on who they're going to rest, who they're going to sit. I think Ricky Foley kind of said in my story, he thought Calgary was looking that far ahead. When he kind of got that suggestion from listening to TSN's broadcast with their romp over the Eskimos, that they're speculating what should Calgary do, should they rest guys because they got things in position. And now they can't. Now they got to play. And I think first place is still a stretch.
I think so too.
It'd be nice if they won on Saturday just to keep the kind of excitement going and the hype going to that game against Edmonton on the second meaningful. But 2 games to catch up to, and I think BC's probably going to be not laying down, but it's not going to have as much meaning for their game too. So that's a stretch. Still, this team came out, and I have to admit, 8 turnovers, Rob. Like that, you've been around this team as long as I have, even if longer, because you and Ron Lancaster are so tight. That I've never seen that before from a defense, and they scored points after every one. So that really showed the fact that the defense wins championships, but you got to have an offense, and I think the offense did enough to win that game with the points they had. I'm going to step on your Durant toes here.
No,
because
I
know you
my
have a
lawyer
bromance.
will intervene here.
I know, so you have to be. I was impressed. I know Durant's numbers weren't great, but watching that game again, he managed the game very well, which I know some people say that's not very the same, but he kind of sensed that this was a game he didn't have to win. He didn't want to
lose it.
Exactly. So he threw the ball away. He's done that in the past. In the summer, he was throwing the ball away when something wasn't there. He handed off to Sheets a little bit more. He ran when he needed to. So I think, looking back, Durant didn't put up the numbers, but he scored when they had to, and he managed the game very well. And I think that's overlooked in all of this. And I know the Durant haters are going to be on me now because I prefer them to be riding on your back more than mine. But kudos to Darian. And he might be in the talk for the most outstanding player again. 30 touchdowns, could get 5. If he gets 5, he's setting a Rider record. We may have to consider him that. And I know that's your job, and I'm supposed to provide the other side, but I think Darian deserves a little bit of it.
I think he deserves a lot more credit than he's getting, and this comes from someone who's consistently trumpeted his skills.
Like him.
But 30 touchdown passes in a season, he's very likely to become the first Rider quarterback to lead the league in touchdown passes since Ken Austin in 1992. Granted, there have been some quarterbacks around the league who've been hurt, and that may have mitigated against some other quarterbacks being able to catch him. But I think durability is a trait too, and that's something that Darian has exhibited this year. If he can come out and have a big game against Calgary, I think that really makes the MOP race a little more interesting than it otherwise might be. The offense has dipped a bit the last few weeks. The defense has started carrying the team, but the Riders still have a quarterback who's playing at an all-star level when you consider the entire season, and you don't win. I think your chances of winning a championship are greatly enhanced when your quarterbacking is at the level that Darian Durant is.
And this is the quarterback who told us last week that this is a running team, which seems like almost weird to see a CFL team say they're a running team. That's what they are. They're a run-based team. And when Corey Sheets is in there, granted he had 148 yards and 41 of them came on a lost fumble. So it's kind of thing. But they're a running team, and Corey Sheets gives them that identity. And it's interesting to see. I just thought it's funny. Even today, the Riders are back at practice, and all the questions are about running backs. You weren't talking about the receivers. And even Darian made a point of bringing up Kevin Glenn's a pretty good quarterback, and he sees the game as being second down conversions between them. And we all kind of nodded very smartly and talked about running backs again, because we're smart.
Well, so much of what they do is predicated on the run.
Exactly. And how many times have they run first down? Like almost every time. I think I look at that stat. So it is a running team, and it's a running game and a running style of offense. And what better kind of offense is for this type of weather than a running style of game?
And there's such a correlation between the Rough Riders playing well and them having Corey Sheets in the lineup.
Yes.
I mean, that downturn that they had over the 4 games, 11 quarters of that span, Corey Sheets wasn't available to them. And as soon as he comes back, they go into BC and didn't have huge totals that night. He had 80 yards on 14 carries on October 4th in Vancouver. But I think even the fact that Corey Sheets is in the lineup, that gives defenses something that they have to think about. They can't just completely bail out on the line of scrimmage and put everybody but the equipment manager in the secondary. And that opens up everything for them offensively.
You're a veteran of this business. Are we focused too much on corners and Sheets? Is there other parts of this game we're missing?
I don't. When the participants themselves are making it an issue, then I think it's even more legitimate than it would ordinarily be for the media to focus on it. It's something that Corey Sheets hasn't shied away from at all. John Cornish is certainly open to talking about the topic. Sometimes you get the quarterback versus quarterback battles, the Manning Bowl, or even if we were to say, okay, it's Darian Durant versus Kevin Glenn, you can bet that the comments would be, I'm not playing against Kevin Glenn, I'm playing against the Calgary defense, or the inverse of that. But in this case, the running backs are basically saying bring it on as far as the comparison. So why shouldn't it be fodder for a multitude of stories and a multitude of platforms?
And I love the fact billboard material, like Corey Sheets comes on and says he's the best running back in the league. And I expect the guy to say that. But it's still great stuff to work with. Cornish is kind of not backing off in his stance. And even on today, they were both named, Corey was named the Offensive Player of the Week, and John Cornish named the Canadian Player of the Week.
How timely.
And wonderful. Yeah, even the league can't figure out what to do with these two guys. Well, let's split the boards down the middle, because it was just they both had that type of weekend I think maybe the fact Corey Sheets did it in a more important game might have had some sort of weight on that, but I don't know what had happened there. But Corey Sheets is a good guy to deal with. He's not afraid to be confident. He's not cocky. That's the way he is. And I know people are saying, "Oh, this guy's gone over the top," but he's very calm, and he's. I think we'll give him a little plug. He's doing a bowling event on October 30th. That he's trying to get his face out there in the community a little more and show he's doing that kind of stuff. So he's also recognizing that part of the job along with carrying the ball. So it's going to be fun writing about these two guys, and I think sooner or later we'll get into the receivers, see who the better receivers are, and the matchup at quarterback. But I think Kevin Glenn is really underrated and kind of been underappreciated this year. I think
the interesting thing too is okay, you've got the 2 premier running backs in the league going up against each other, but you're also dealing with two top flight defenses. Yeah. So who can do a better job of shutting down that ace running back that the other team has? It's just an intriguing chess match from so many perspectives. Darian Durant's been the best quarterback in the West Division this year. Lately, the best quarterback in the West Division has been Kevin Glenn, the way he's been coming on, and since they've given him a vote of confidence in Calgary after that revolving door. So you can approach this game from any number of standpoints and consider it a valid angle.
I still think running backs sell more tickets than defensive. I think you're going to say this is going to be a 14-9 game. They're not going to sell a lot of tickets. Calgary's interesting. There's a hockey game on that night. I think it's Washington and Calgary played 8, so that may have an effect on ticket sales in Calgary. I think Washington has a pretty good hockey player there that we've all heard about, so that may draw some of the attention away. But this game should sell itself. I know in this market it'd be, we'd probably see a sellout for that game if it was played here.
And it'll be interesting too to see how the people of Calgary or the transplanted Saskatchewanians or people with those loyalties respond. Like people keep talking about the home playoff game. Well, they've got some home road games in their future too, by the looks of things. So we'll explore that. We'll look ahead more to Calgary and everything else in the second half of the Rider Rumblings podcast. I promise to pronounce that correctly the second time around. Thanks for listening to us in the first half. We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Rob. This is Murray. We're back for part 2 of the Rider Rumblings podcast. Our collective 105 years sitting before you. That means Murray is 98. So let's discuss the upcoming game in Calgary, and let's focus on the defense. So much of the discussion has been offensively oriented, but as we alluded to late in the first half of the podcast, the defenses are also pretty formidable. If you look at the Rider defense, they are on pace, barring an absolutely porous performance in one of the final 2 games. They're going to allow the fewest points they ever have since the CFL went to an 18-game regular season in 1986. So 2002 is the only time the Riders have ever been below 400 points allowed in an 18-game season. So when you look at the kind of defense the Riders are playing, that stands them in good stead, certainly going into the stretch run here. Thoughts?
Maybe they could get better by adding a rush end that would help them out. Imagine if that dream world if Alex Hall made it to the team and they traded for him. And they did, and they got better. So this defense arguably should be even better in his last 4 games with Alex Hall. We talked about some of the early intriguing matchups in this game in the earlier portion of the Rider podcast, but now we have Charleston Hughes and Alex Hall, both tied with 15 sacks, both creating lots of buzz about most outstanding defensive player awards. So this is another head-to-head battle. They're not on the field at the same time, but they're both going to have an impact. Charleston Hughes has really come on, and we both know that he's a Rider wrecker. We've seen him do so many things. He's turned good offensive tackles into bad and bad offensive tackles into even worse. So I love watching him play. He's one of the funniest guys in the league. I remember way back in August when the first time the Riders played in Calgary, he offered this great gem. You just hit sheets in the backfield and you can slow him down. And we all kind of laughed. And he was right. And it kind of, with looking at Corey Sheets, if you can slow him down, you can do that. But the Riders' defense, I think Alex Hall has made an impact. I don't think his last game was as big an impact, I think. I think it was still, he had some, but I didn't think he had all of the plays he could have. I think he's still learning the system and whatnot. But imagine that front is so good, Rob. I think you just got to say things about what it does with the different looks. And I know I can't get used to 97 as a defensive tackle. I keep seeing that number.
I think there's some guards who aren't going to want to get used to that either.
Man, that's John Chick for people who don't quite know the numbers as well as we do. But boy, and Ricky Foley's having a most outstanding defensive player award. And looking back, Weldon Brown comes back, and boy, what a difference he made on that team. He should have had 2 touchdowns, scoop and score, and he should have had the pick, and instead on that unnecessary roughness on roughing the passer by Zach Evans, which was deserved, but still was wiped out a great play. And you get a guy back like that, that's almost like a Sheets-like return for a guy on defensive, because I think Weldon Brown was on pace to be the most outstanding defensive player of the year. And after that game, I think he kind of we put himself back into consideration. We get one more game before we have to submit our final votes for these awards. But, boy, the defense is doing everything well. And just one more thing on the most outstanding defense. Dwight Anderson has to be.
It's got to be Dwight Anderson.
Well, yeah. But
Dwight Anderson has done exactly what they wanted him to do. He was the first free agent they signed this year.
By the way. You owe me that
and I do. And there'll be a free leader post in your mailbox tomorrow morning.
With all the flyers.
They were determined to upgrade their defense during the offseason. And yes, there were moves along the defensive line, but the first thing they did was sign Dwight Anderson, not without controversy. And they wanted a defensive halfback who could take the other team's best receiver and not necessarily shut him down completely, because you're not going to do that in the Canadian Football League all the time. But somebody you could just say, okay, Dwight Anderson, meet Fred Stamps. Line up against the other team's best receiver and make it a real tough afternoon for him, because they didn't have that last year. And so Dwight Anderson has come in, leads the team with 5 interceptions, takes care of the other team's best receiver. In the most recent game against Edmonton, the most recent game versus Edmonton, not the most recent game, period. He and a number of people lined up against Fred Stamps. Fred Stamps, the league's leading receiver, didn't catch a pass until 6 minutes left in the game. When you look at the demands of that position, taking on the other team's best receiver all the time, or most of the time, and playing at the level that Dwight Anderson has this year, I think he's the defensive player of the year, and I really don't think it should be much of an argument.
What about the off-field incidents?
That shouldn't factor into the discussion at all. Is he or is he not their best defensive player? Who has had a better year defensively for the Saskatchewan Roughriders than Dwight Anderson?
Well, you make a very solid argument, but it's hard. The off-field incidents are part of him this year. Unfortunately, he rightly or wrongly, when you're weighing it into that factor, and it's part of the distractions. And if you look at the way it occurred, the Riders went on their skid. When it happened, all that stuff kind of backed up in the Riders. But he has bounced back, and you make a solid argument for him, but I still think many of the voters are still going to have to deal with the off-field incidents and how they're going to weigh that into the factor what he plays. So.
I don't see why that should be.
Is
he not the best defensive player?
We have managed to get by with what happened with Corey Sheets in the offseason. We've kind of said, cover the football player, not the man. So I guess that's probably what we have to do with Dwight Anderson.
And we're also talking about allegations here.
Yeah, I know, that's very true. So, but it's still, it's something we all have to deal with, and it's not going to make the voting easier.
And it's easy for me because I don't have a vote. So good luck to you.
Good luck with that. Yeah, I got a lot of head scratching to do, which you like to point out that I do. I've scratched so often I rub my hair off. But Sunday's the day I think we vote, and it's the deadline for voting. So there's going to be a lot of thinking going on Sunday afternoon. What else are we talking about?
Let's talk about
Stampeders.
I want to talk about just the timing of when they play Calgary, because it seems they're always on some kind of streak when they go into Calgary. If you look at last year, they won their first 3, go to Calgary, lose. Then they, to end the regular season, they lost 4 in a row, then they go to Calgary, lose. This year they're 5-0, they go to Calgary, lose. Now they've won 3 in a row, streaking once again to the good, and they go to Calgary. So this team's always, the pendulum is always swinging in one direction or the other when they go to Calgary. And as much as this team has accomplished in the better part of 2 seasons under Corey Chamberlain and with Brendan Taman having unfettered control of the football operations, the thing that they haven't done, the one hurdle that they have yet to clear, and the most important one, is for them to win in Calgary. Not even necessarily this weekend, quite likely in the West Final, but they got to win in Calgary. Otherwise, it's a qualified success.
That's a good point. It's not that Calgary isn't any good. Like, Calgary is a good team, but I think they're the best team in the league right now. So they run into this team even back in the summer. Calgary was playing as well as the Riders were, and they came out. So Calgary is a very good football team. So it's not a matter of timing; it's a matter of how good their opposition is. So I think there is something to that streakiness. Boy, if they beat Calgary on Saturday, that's just going to send this team through the roof, because they're confident, but I think it's in their back of the minds. If we beat Calgary, now we have the momentum that may prove to be the same momentum that's carried them to Grey Cups in the past, at huge wins at the end of the season to do that. But that's a long, long ways away. So got to do that. I just kind of we kind of a blank. They have a home playoff game, and you and I are old enough to remember that home playoff games were not givens and were not guaranteed. And now it's almost like they expect home playoff games, which is good, because the bar has been raised so high that we can talk about a home playoff game, because just getting there isn't good enough anymore. You know that. It's kind of an exciting thing. I know I was talking to Jim Hobson. He's, remember the days of 22,000 people in these stands. Remember the telethons and all this stuff. And there's been this extended streak of successes that we kind of take for granted now that they're happening. So I think people should some days. I don't always like to remind people of history, because the one thing pessimists are Rough Rider fans, but just remember the bad old days and kind of savor some of these good old days.
I sat through 11 years in Section 204 where they didn't make the playoffs in any of them, and where they had one winning season in that whole time. Joey Walters was the only thing to watch some years. But you're right. Even the attendance last week against BC, it's just under 35,000, and there's some grumbling from people saying, well, gee, why isn't there a sellout, et cetera, et cetera. 35,000 people. In a normal year, that place would sit 33,000.
Yeah.
I remember in 1979 when they got 28,012 versus BC. It was the first time they'd ever sold out an expanded Taylor Field, and that looked like University of Michigan Stadium compared to what people had been seeing. 33,000 people against Sacramento in 1993, sort of a groundbreaking attendance there. So now it's nearly 35,000, and again, maybe it's being taken for granted because you're saying, well, gee, they could have.
There were a lot of empty seats. 40? Like, it was announced 35, and I think we both kind of realized there were spaces there that you don't really see. But there's room for 45,000, so there's going to be empty spaces. So they're making money this year. Things are going to do very well. A home playoff game is going to just fatten their bottom line. They're going to sell more merchandise. They're going to sell more pop, more beer, whatever at the stadium. It's just going to be more money for this team. And they're going to need it, because we have a new stadium on the horizon. There's many costs associated with that they're going to try to go in with as small as debt as possible. And home playoff games help that a lot. Another part of this home playoff game, even with 35,000, they make a lot of noise, don't they? They really, the fans, I know I'm not a big fan of encouraging them to cheer, because like you and I kind of agree, Rider fans are pretty savvy. They know when to cheer. You don't have to tell them when to make noise.
You don't need an applause sign at
But I
Mosaic
kind of
Stadium.
like the fact the way the defense was hanging it up and the 4 guys on the sideline were doing their little bit, keep people involved. Like, part of it's entertainment, and entertainment means having fun. And if that's the way to have fun, I'm fine with that. But I don't think they're going to lean on that for all the time. I think the Rider fans know when to cheer, they know when to be quiet. But maybe just a little lesson that you can create some disturbance before they're in the huddle, I think was just an interesting part of Corey's muddle the huddle. So maybe they just need a little push to that. But we don't need the encouraging the fans to make noise in the stadium.
Well, at least there's not some blowhard on the microphone like in
Well, I have to listen
Calgary.
to you on the side.
I do apologize for that.
That's always one of the things. I keep thinking you're cheering and cheering, but
Well, you've listened to me long enough today, so we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for being with us again this week. For Murray McCormick, I'm Rob Vanstone, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.